When one is faced by some form of banter or scuffle regarding what to do, what not to do, when to enforce, when not to enforce, how to enforce, best way to deal with that is, if you're certain what you're doing is proper and you have first-hand knowledge and experience of it working for yourself and others, then there's no need to banter, there's no need to argue, there's no need to scuffle. You just keep doing what you're doing, go that way, and have others go theirs. Although majority of the time those who will create banter, scuffles, are usually those who gets compensated for the purpose of creating confusion, because they hear something that sounds so appealing to them and they just run with it, and they get stuck in a perpetual cycle of chasing their tail, years after years after years. Or they bring up scuffle and banters because they actually don't know, and when faced with something where they could grow and evolve, they deny growth. So instead of growing and being better than what you once were, they deny it, which is fine too. You do that. In other cases, those who bring up unnecessary banter and scuffles are usually those who are in fact invested in people's blindness and darkness. But to the general public, it might sound good, it might sound smooth, but don't let anyone drag you into a world that you're not ready to deal with. First, realize that it's your life. You're doing some supposed whatever it is that you're doing that people tell you to do. Stop, think twice about it. If there's no law making reference to it, stop for a moment again and think twice about it. It merely sounding good is not enough. These things people are running away from when it comes to there's a reason why you're constantly pulled into these court systems. So people say, oh, they're not courts. Yeah, of course they're courts. It's different types of courts for different purposes, for different people, but it nonetheless is court. They send you paper through the mail, they send you correspondence, they speak to you over the phone, you have engagements with people. Of course it's court. There's a reason why they pull you into court all the time, whether it's based on a venue or territory, it's based on the land or other means. The reason why they do that is because court is how you conclude things. Court is how you remove dispute, and they're putting it to use. And when they drag you in there one way, no matter how simple, traffic, criminal, civil, probate, child support, whatever it is, and you're trying to run away from it by doing some other stuff on some other end because someone told you that this over here, they're a bank, this, yeah, of course they're banks, but do know that they are using judicial power. It's not on the same level as yours, hence it's quasi, because it's lower, lesser, and they require your power to enforce it, and you give them the power to enforce it by waiving your right to bring your judicial power into the equation. Focus on the commercial aspect, but don't let that be your sole focus. Bring in the power of the law itself. The operation of law and the enforcement of how things are done are within evidence, are within the civil procedures, are within the public laws. are within the federal registry. They're within your county records. They're within your heart, sure. They're within the maxims. They're within your heritage. If you keep running away from the law itself, and you keep doing if you limit your remedies just to the commercial aspect, which again, there's nothing wrong with, because they are in business, and you must deal with it. But if you trying to use that as a handicap to run away, they know they got your ass. They got you. So you can listen to all that sweet talk people talk about all day. If they're not referring to the Constitution one way or another, because the Constitution is what balances and validates all that, whether you believe it or not. They're not dealing with that. If they're not dealing with rules of evidence, then none of that shit is admissible in court to your benefit. Just keep that in mind while it sounds good and smooth. People will tell you don't go into court because that's their venue. True, you want to avoid it as best as possible. That's why you always seek injunctive relief and equity before any of that shit even happens. And for whatever reason, if you meet somebody who's just gung-ho on their end, then bring the law, lay the law down, set the record straight so that those who are coming behind you will have that as their decisives to use. But then again, most people who will talk sweet to you and talk smart to you about just doing the commercial aspect, they themselves are afraid of the fact that they don't have the capacity to really enforce the law. They are afraid of actually taking the time to sit and think about what the law says in the operation of law. Even when they deal with all these supposed commercial stuff, they don't even read the regulation behind it. They're not going to tell you about the full acquittance and how they constantly move it, and whatever section and category they move it to determines who you send it to beyond the basic parties. They won't tell you that there's a federal regulation, there's a federal acquisition regulation that governs those GSAs. And it tells you what to do with it. They don't tell you. They don't tell you the subtleties of how it's done. And the ones that say that it doesn't work, maybe they just don't know how to do it. You can't really blame those people that much. They don't know, they don't know. But then there are those who just tell you, yeah, do all that commercial stuff. Get the Q-SIP, get this and that. The straw man, all caps, this. All right. Keep ignoring the fact that you need to put judicial notices and challenge the subject matter and personal jurisdiction of that. Handle things backdoor, but publicly, you have to balance the books. You do it by bringing the law on both ends. Don't ignore the judicial aspect of it, because that is you. You bring that in. The moment you don't do it, you waive it. On the same conversation, you will hear these people talk about equity ever so vaguely. Equity doesn't aid a volunteer. So understand that harmony and balance is the key. If you're talking about equity, observe nature. Because equity is nature's law. Most people aren't ready for it. If you're talking, and when most people talk about equity, it's so vague. I was in a Zoom call a couple of days ago or yesterday, and people were asking these hosts question about equity and Chancery, and they just keep giving them this derogatory, vague response, making fun of the people. Like, it's just nonetheless, the bottom line is with equity, you have to understand at law first. Equity is merely an extension of law. At law is a part of law. So is equity. Equity is an extension of perfection of law. Where there's absolutely no more remedy in common law, equity fixes it. And most people are not ready for that. Why? In a public venue, here are some of the reasons why. When was the last time anyone in the Americas went through rite of passage? That's one. Two, when you begin to look at equity, you will start seeing things about England. You have no choice but to go into heritage who's who and who it used to apply to, and why law and equity were merged together from the federal equity rules, turned into federal rules of civic procedures, and the federal criminal procedures, and the federal rules of evidence. Law and equity were merged to assist you. And if you keep ignoring these civil procedures, rule of evidence, they even tell you it's a rule of evidence. Everything is about evidence. You keep ignoring it, and you think you're going to be able to invoke equity? Best of luck, because the clues as to how you're going to invoke equity is directly implemented to these rules of evidence and civil procedures. Stop lying to yourself. But if you want to do that, that is fine. It's all right. And if someone else is telling you something, stop for a moment beyond what it feels like. And oftentimes people are so desperate for solution, they're looking for the quickest way out. I will tell you right now, there is no quickest way out. If you're not willing to stand up and speak, you've been relaxed for so long. Your father, your grandparents, your mother, your great-great-grandparents, and you think you just speaking up within 2-3 months is going to fix it all? It doesn't exist that way. It doesn't work that way. Be truthful to yourself. Equity is self-responsibility. And even if you're dealing with that law first, because you need that. Once you start looking at all this England here and that, you start dealing with heritage, you realize who equity once applied to and why they merged it for the sake of the peasants. So the ages move, cycles move. And when the people who run society looks at the ages and cycle, they don't give a fuck about what you think you are, what you look like, or how you feel. But they put into account the substance of existence, which is the fact that if you can look into the Hindustani and the Aryan ages, the yugas, they tell you there are certain cycles and certain ages, certain phase of consciousness comes in and people fall into depravity. And certain things has to be made into law and enforced based on natural law to balance that out so that people can come out of that slowly. And that was what was done when equity and law were merged, when we came into this age that we got into. Look into the Bible, the Old Testament, it will tell you. Look into Surah Al-Yasin and Quran. Look into Ifai Jubi, it will tell you. They tell you what these things are. And if you're trying to run away from self-responsibility and looking for some magic trick somewhere else, you're setting yourself up for a life of pain, because the people on the other end are not fucking around. They're serious about this. And so should you. Sure, deal with commercial things. In fact, you must. Because the medium that you are being infringed is through commerce. And the law itself is being overlooked on purpose because you are the one that's supposed to bring it in. It is you. But you can't go into equity unless you understand our law. And if English is the only language that you speak, then you're also lying to yourself about your ability to access equity. Look into the history and heritage of equity, and you'll realize that most of these things called legalese, the reason why legalese sound like that is people who speak different language would understand what I'm about to say. When you transliterate one dialect or one language into English, meaning a sentence, the cat jumped over the fence. That's English. If you were to say it in another language or another dialect, and then you were to transliterate it, it would not be pronounced as the cat jumped over the fence. It would sound very much like how Yoda speaks. And that is exactly what legalese is. The reason why legalese sounds that way is because it was transliterated into English from other dialects and languages. You don't know about so-called African Semitic languages, Latin. English is an ancient language in its own right. Yes, it's an amalgamation of Sanskrit, High German, other dialects, and etc. all over the world. It's a language of commerce itself. So this is not to put English in a derogatory phase, but more so you must understand, if English is the only language you speak, you would never be able to access equity. I'll just put it that way. Be true to yourself and know who you are, because equity is gonna cut down on you if you're fucking around with it. And there's no way you would really understand what that means unless you study at law. Stop running away from it. Most people don't even know these things. They just want to do some commercial shit, and it's on the other side, try to run away from the substance. Even that commercial stuff you're doing is more so theirs than what you're running away from. People so don't read rules of evidence, don't read statutes and codes because it's theirs. No, it's not. It's yours. It's just being converted for their benefit and their purpose. It's your laws that they're using against your ass. So when you study it, don't study it as though it's theirs. Study it as though because it is in fact yours, and bring it back into its constitutional fold. And then all the articles and all the Confederation and treaties prior to that Constitution will show you and lead you to where you need to go. But most people are not being true to themselves. If you're not allying yourself with other people from other parts of the world, accessing equity will be a bit difficult for you in the Americas. Because the people who run Americas, they understand the fact that the system that existed here prior to the modern one that was converted and just shifted over, the change of hands of power, they understand that it was a world power. And the power here, the seat here in the Americas, had allies from all over the world. And that ties was broken in order for the lesser entities whose hands of power was shifted into to be able to carry on the weight. And if you want to access equity, there are programs and algorithms put in place that will present itself, not by accident, but specifically on purpose because you're trying to access equity. And if that thing approaches you, you better be true to yourself. All that other bullshit you're doing to run away from that law, if you don't know how that law works, better start studying it because it will lead you to true equity. Nonetheless, commerce is governed by laws. Learn those laws governed by commerce. Just don't follow some steps of doing this paper, sending this to someone, and relinquishing your substantive right to someone without even understanding it or comprehending or being savvy to it. Whatever verbiage you want to use, overstand, sure. And when you're one with that commercial aspect of things, you have no other choice but to focus at law. When you begin to really understand that law, the path to equity will open. Because there's different hierarchies: natural law, ecclesiastic law, man-made law, all that. You have to climb those degrees. You have to climb those measurements, those capacities, those volumes, those weight, those powers. You just don't go to the gym and try to bench press 250. You have to start somewhere. You don't go out and just try to run a mile in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. You have to start somewhere, condition your system to understand the basics, the ebbs and flow of things. Stop lying to yourself about how things work. Be honest. Be honest with yourself by first eliminating the trash that you've put in your head, your mind, body, heart, and soul. Once that is done, do some self-reflection and begin with your state and federal constitution. Once that is done, read these 3 books. And after reading it, go back and study them. If you want, read them like a novel at first. Think secondarily, study it in details. 1 page might take you a while to study, but you get there because it will lead you to the basics when it comes to really being savvy to the importance of being harmonious when it comes to law, of not being stuck in some mere theory. The first book, How Equity Conquered Common Law. It's written by Stephen N. Subrin, or Subrin. The second book, The New Federal Equity Rules by James Love Hopkins. The third one, which the first person that I ever heard of speak about this was Jonah Bay, so the credits to this goes to him. And the third one is Common Forms and Rules for Drawing and Answering an Original Bill in Chancery. These are very excellent books. But see that last book, Common Forms for Drawing Original Bills in Chancery? You don't get a fundamental understanding of those first 2 books, you will be lost in the sauce with that last one. So do yourself a favor and start slowly with your state constitution, because that is the closest to a basic everyday term that equity and law can be written in a manner that is harmonious with your spirit without having to understand one word or the other, because it is already you. It is a constitution. It is what you are, and so is equity.